THG Star Dragon Publishing presents Pearls of Sea and Stone, Book of Seals, a Selkies Skins story. Written by Teresa Garcia. Narrated by Illya Leonov. Part 2. Castle Carrick, November 28th. Several weeks passed before Kirsty had the chance to read the book again, this time leaning against David as they sat on the log that was beside the cove of the loch that they had claimed for themselves. He had his arm around her, and they had arranged their school robes over them both for added warmth. It made for an awkward study position for the both of them, but at the same time it was comfortable. Neither of them was having to conjure heat, and Kirsty had only been able to hum so long to keep them warm. A dusting of snow fell the night before, sticking in some places but not in others, giving the forest edge a patchwork quality. Kirsty fell quickly into her book again, David pausing his own studies now and then to check on her whenever he felt her grow tense or flinch. The Lady of the Lake and Well, or How the Lady Lost Her Name. In the days of the ancient kings of the isles, long before the countries lie as they do now, the Lady of the Land Waters traveled wide, searching for a way back to her sister the sea. She became split, and so resided in each river, lake, pond, and stream. As she split, she began to lose more and more of her memory of the time before time. The people of the land saw her benevolence when she showed herself. Some became her water-bearers when asked, after she had deemed them worthy, taking a vial with them wherever they went, that she might travel more widely, and remain with those that had gained her favor. So it was that particular wells and lakes began to be more well known than others, and she was given different names by the various peoples. One lake in particular became more known than the rest during a particular time long ago. To be King Brian Boru, now called King of the Fair Ones, had secured her help in warding off one of the invasions that were common then, and brought his men to her for healing after the battle. It is this that attracted the attentions of one known as Astaroth from his dark realm, where he had been cast by the deities of the desert lands and rising suns. He desired her ability to be many at once, and also for her fair form, for her light would have eased his exile. So it was that Astaroth investigated the hearts of all of Boru's men, seeking one with a dark enough heart that he could take possession of the form. So it was that a suitable vessel was found in one man that had seen much battle and desired for himself the powers of sorcerers that had also stood with them. Astaroth promised him, this Morban, these powers, and the pact was made. The lady saw Astaroth immediately when Morban and his king, who had no knowledge of the possession, came before her in order that Morban might receive care at her hands within the waters of the lake cave. When he went in unto her, once the king had to take leave at the threshold, he did try to claim her. This is the first use that we have knowledge of the lady's sword. In calling this sword to use, she began the path to losing her name, for violence of such form was against her nature. The battle was long, and the cave nor the lake remained to this day, and where they had been was sealed away, the gate lost to the battle. When she slew the mortal form, using steel instead of water, the loss was sealed as well, leaving only her regional names to her. Though sent back to the void, Astaroth had already begun his work as well, Her friendship with Brian Boru was severed, and he cast her vial back into one of her wells. Only one born of her blood water has the ability to restore her name to her, even if some other deity were to whisper it into her ear. Ashtoreth has tried several times since to regain access to this plane of existence that we live in. Another incident that I have heard mention of from the Selkies' priestly class is the better-known tale of King Arthur's fall. This time it was Morgana that was possessed, though both the lady and Merlin tried to prevent it. The loss of the both compounded with the return of her sword and the loss of yet another friend. Now it is said that the lady is particularly clingy regarding those that she loves. Kirsty snorted, trying to imagine the lady as the Lady of the Lake. All they had to go on as to what her name might have been was an ah sound. What? David had looked up from his book at the unladylike snort. Kirsty blushed after realizing she'd scoffed aloud, and in such an unfetching manner. Just something I read. There's a legend about how a water goddess lost her name. Not sure if it's mine, but I don't see how, since it mentioned both Brian Boru and Merlin, Morgana, Arthur, as having been friends of hers. Did you ever hear her mention them? Maybe it is. No, I did ask if she had a sword when I was really little, though. It's called Mir, and not Excalibur. Mir, he repeated, feeling how the word fit in his mouth, and trying to get the accent right. Kirsty blushed, and tried to keep from shivering at his accent. It still had very great overtones of his native German, which was perhaps a little too pleasing to her ear right now. Focus, Kirsty. He'll think you're an Ornchach if you swoon over his speech, whether he has had time to get used to the random blushes or no, she chided herself. Instead, she nodded, though she had no hope of hiding the way the corners of her lips were lifting. Me means balance. I've absolutely no idea what Excalibur would mean, though. How would this prevent her from being the Lady in the Lake, though? David looked down at the book open on her lap, studying the rushed style of the strange letters, spelling out tales in a language he was now somewhat sure was probably a version of Gaelic, and the fanciful illustrations. The lady that he saw pictured as standing on the water and crossing swords with a man floating above the water bore an expression that reminded him somewhat of how Kirsty looked when she was rebelling. He'd seen it a fair few times when she'd lash out at Morvan, which was happening more and more often, even though she still often tried to simply disengage. She's fooling far if that's the case, and what sane person would claim that the nameless well deity is the same as the Lady of the Lake? She raised her eyebrow at him. He shrugged, unsure whether this was a discussion worth trying to press his point over. There are stranger things. Kirsty sighed and nodded, accepting his point. Maybe. I don't know. Some of this I don't know quite what to think. Maybe you've got an opinion. She began to read him the next section, first a sentence in the original language, and then translating it, pausing longer when reaching a word she was not fully familiar with. The marks of Mara, the Lady, and the Moon. As the children of the deity spread and mingled more with humans, it came time to place marks upon them, so as to lessen the likelihood of people asking for certain favors, which they only grant to those that are theirs. The children of the forest gods developed tree-like qualities. These are now the Gillidu and others, who have children with humans that smell of the forest and are close to the trees and animals. The children of the hunt have proclivities to hunting and the keen vision and scent. Some of those have inherited shape-shifting abilities of various sorts, from lycanthropy to true shape-shifting. This is a mark that must be weighed carefully, though, as fully human magicians sometimes manage to find the way. Even the dread Cailleach has been known to place a mark on those she claims, whether she claims them for blessing or curse. Those that bear the marks of Mara and the Lady of the Water are our concern in this missive. Large, wet, expressive eyes are one mark of the waters, particularly among those of Selkie descent. A love of music runs in their veins, as does dance. The call to the seas or water always sounds for these, so that none can be happy if they do not at least live near a stream or a well, though lakes, rivers, and, of course, the wide sparkling sea is preferable. Some of these, particularly the Manx and Welsh, though you will see this among the Orkneys as well, will have extra flesh between their fingers to produce webbing more akin to flippers. All children with strong concentrations of either Mara or the lady's blood are particularly gifted swimmers. Selkie and Merrow women have a particular grace about them that stands apart. The men tend to be generous and charming. Both sexes are marked by periods of unwarranted wistfulness and deep thought, more heavily so among the Selkie. The priestly line especially bears a strange mark among the women. Witness how certain among them will have waving marks around the arms in blue, which do not wash away, no matter how they are scrubbed. These have caused one family that I am aware of troubles at times through history, depending on the local's view of those thought to have bred with deities or the fae. Those that are bound to both Mara and the lady have two lines twining around their wrists, and sometimes facial markings. Facial markings are more common to have painted on only for ritual and council. Those that are to be heads, or chieftain priests, or priestesses, are additionally forced to always wear one or two bracelets of silver and gold, wrought in the same manner. The marks of the moon are important to know of as well. These people are pronouncedly dreamy, more so than the normal man or woman, and are gifted with the sight in one form or another. The most obvious mark of the moon is madness. Some state lycanthropy to be a mark of the moon, but if so, then this must surely be a shared one with the Lord of the Hunt, according to my research. Sometimes the moon deity, who gives a different name to each that asks, will place a moon phase mark somewhere on the body of those under his influence. Every once in a great while, a priestess among the Mer peoples or one of the clan chiefs will be called on by all three of these deities, in which case the binding bands will gain a third strand, pearls, moonstones, or similar stones, and the tattoo marks may gain a third strand, and phase signs, if the mark is not already elsewhere. The moon is considered more dangerous than Mara, though no Selkie that I know of has been able to quite point out why, other than an association with madness. There are other, younger deities that some tribes and clans follow, but these are the main three that the Selkie folk follow. They also are known to ask the Lord of the Hunt for his blessing on the more dangerous and difficult hunts that are partaken in by those clans that affix themselves to claimed areas. Kirsty made a face, and stopped reading, looking over at him, and then blushing when seeing the intense look on his face. "I hope my accent wasn't too thick. It's hard to go back and forth, and it's older than I'm used to finding in the Makay log." "No, I understood you when you translated." He looked from her to the book, studying the carefully scribed examples. "I don't like these marks. I don't remember seeing one on your mother when I saw her briefly at the station." "Sleeves and a glamour, and hers a-fadin' as I grow, and she does more to lessen—" She broke off, her nose wrinkling and eyes narrowing at a memory that made her eye-teeth throb and chest heavy. "When I was little they still looked new. The popularity of tribal tattoos now in the Cowan community is probably a boon, with how easily hers blend in now." He made a non-committal noise, which she couldn't decipher a meaning for, then took her left hand away from her book, using his left hand and keeping his right arm around her. "May I?" When she nodded, trying to tamp down the blush, he lifted her hand enough for her sleeve to slide back and expose her wrist. He examined it carefully, turning it over slowly as if studying her still unmarked skin. Kirsty tried not to wrinkle her nose at how dark a blue her veins were, nor how much more noticeable they might be compared to other people's that she had observed, or to how frail the action made her bones look. He moved his examinations to her hand next, as thoroughly as she'd allowed him on their first ride to the school, before their initiation into it. "I just can't imagine you with any marks or tattoos, Kirsty. I don't like it. You're fine as you are." He released her gently, looking into her very wide eyes, which could not settle on a shade of blue. "I don't either, actually. I don't know if it'll hurt like the ones the Cowans do. I really hope not. It scares me." David frowned. "I don't want you to be scared, either. Worrying about mer-people attacking you, or being dragged off to a settlement, is enough." He'd said it as clearly as he knew how, but whether Kirsty understood what he was really trying to say, he wasn't certain. There seemed to be a flicker in her eyes before she looked down, and her cheeks were pink. His heart constricted and jumped a bit. "Did I say it wrong?" "Thank you, David." Her voice was small and meek, and she found his hand without asking, giving it a squeeze. "When you're around, I'm not so scared." "I'm glad." He smiled at her, and she smiled back, and snuggled slightly closer. Kirsty sat like that with him for several moments, letting her eyes close and just enjoying being semi-normal for a short time, before they resumed their mutual studies. The Temples of Mara and the Lady. The temples and wells of the Lady once spread over the world, but now she concentrates her consciousness mainly upon the Isles. I am aware of there being pools and wells that await her return on the continent. I do not know enough about the wells of the Lady to provide an accurate map of where they all lie, although I have provided this to the utmost of mine own knowledge and researches. I am much more versed in the lore of Mara. The temples of Mara that I am familiar with are the two temples of the 9th wave, the temples of the Northern Lights, of which there were 4 that I was aware of before coming here to Our Lady of the Seas, in the land of the Air. There were the Temple of Pearl, Temple of Shell, and Temple of the Horn. Of those in the lands beyond my travels I cannot say for certain, and Mara herself once went by many names, as did her sister, so there may be yet more. There are also various cities along the sea floor, the deeper ones beyond the normal reach of the regular selkie. I do not have personal knowledge of the deep-sea cities, only that in the capitals of these are sub-temples to Mara. Just as among the larger selkie cities, they are represented at these by statues, just as how certain denizens of the deep are represented by statuary at the shallower temples. Once in several generations a mating between members of deep-sea and shallow temples will occur to ensure that various bloodlines remain represented. Also, the temples will exchange mates among the branches every few generations to keep the rivalry at minimum. There is only one known instance of this being flouted, and there are extenuating circumstances. Kirsty narrowed her eyes, shutting the book with a decisive, albeit careful, snap. Her lips curled in a silent snarl as the tremor spread through her body, and she lost track of the musty smell of ancient leather and the fresher smells from David's robes. Not even the trees penetrated into the walled space her mind retreated into. "What's wrong?" David looked up again from his book. The sound of his voice brought her back to where they were. "Nothing. I just read something I don't like." "Way to state the obvious, Kirsty." "Which was what?" "That if I were originally from the sea, I'd have to deal with an arranged marriage. Nothing important to write now." The grimace came back, and she hissed the words. "I think I'm done reading this for now. Auntie had said to stop for a while when I found something that made me too emotional." David pulled his watch from his pocket, checking the time. The Schneingert crest of an argent bear's eye on the left, and sapphire wolf's eye framed by crossed spears, and divided by an upright wand over a field kirsch purpure, gazed back up at him as the hands swept the face. "Break will be over soon anyway. We should probably go." She nodded and got carefully up after undoing the nest of robes. David watched her getting up and steadied her when she wavered. Kirsty nodded at him shyly in thanks before they turned for the ancient castle and wended down the alternately spongy and crunchy aromatic path along the loch's shore. Neither hurrying nor dawdling, they made the trip in good time, entering the castle and passing beneath the examining lintel, where all first years were judged and sorted into their houses by the living statues. Every time they passed beneath, each student was reassessed, but only very rarely was a student passed from one house to a second house. Kirsty hoped that one day David might be moved from Bertramus into Leomaris with her. They would be more likely to spend more time together. On the other hand, he was more studious than most of the Leomaris students. The better thing to hope for would be that the examiners decided that she had matured in such a way that Bertramus would eventually be a better fit. However, unless things changed, she was too energetic for most of the Bertramus students. There were also her friends that she was slowly making, and her aunt. How could she leave them? Perhaps it would be a wise decision to join the Mythological Society for an extracurricular, as if she had time for anything beyond her night courses, dueling practice, and choir. If she joined that society, then she would be mingling with students from other houses more, and thus more likely to form connections that would help assuage loneliness, if she ever did get moved. Without her parents or Byron, it was increasingly necessary to hide this with wide smiles. There was also the likelihood of companionship with other people that were deity-claimed and God-touched. She would not feel so alone among people that had magic, and yet scoffed at the idea of ancient gods actually existing. This tangle of thoughts was listened to by the examiners, as always, their jewel eyes lighting momentarily as they conferred about the pair. Other than the most senior staff members, they alone knew exactly how many students in any given year resided here that were actively claimed or had latent claims. Perhaps they knew more. After all, the living staff could only know about the active claims, and only if they were admitted to or found out. The children continued down the halls of stone, hung with tapestries depicting famous magical battles. Living paintings went about their business on the walls, paying them and other students no mind, unless catching something that was not allowed, or chatted with. The motifs of the twin ravens, serpents, and sea lions ran throughout the castle. Here and there, selkies and other fantastic but endangered races watched the race that had wrested supremacy with wide ranges of emotion. Eventually they gained the potions room and ventured into the open doors. Professor Severin, a dark man in sweeping midnight robes, was finishing arranging papers to pass back to his students. As usual, they had arrived before the others and bowed or curtsied their greetings, then slipped into their desks to prepare. He nodded back, keeping his voice low and tone unexpressive so as not to tamper with the potion brewing. Review Chapter 13. The ingredients for today's original lesson had to be used in the healer's wing. His eyebrow rose like a raven being shooed. Remembering the havoc from dueling, David nodded and turned to the appropriate page, keeping his own voice low. Very well, Professor. When do you expect we will be able to practice with those potions, then? The order should be arriving next week, barring any transport issues. Professor Severin moved from his desk and toward theirs, bringing the scent of herbs and bone set with him. In the corner, both David and Kirsty could smell the myriad of scents in whatever potion he was currently brewing for Lerna's uses. I'm glad we won't be waiting too long, then, sir. I've been looking forward to that lesson. Kirsty looked at the professor eagerly, unintimidated by the stern expression that drove most students away, seeing only that this was a man who had received deep emotional traumas through his life. Though her voice was quiet, hope and eagerness was in her voice. These were safe emotions to have bleed in. Is that going to change our advanced studies any? The professor tilted his head and regarded the half-selkie before him. It was a strange thing, still to be regarded so openly by anyone besides the school-heads, who both knew some of his past and judged him little on it. Neither of these two ever showed any fear or disdain, despite what was publicly known of his involvements. They even sought him out. Granted, they were also seeking him out for his knowledge, but to see students eager was indeed refreshing. No, I do not think it will be impacting those. Although if students do not get better at blocking, I may need to enlist both of you to help me with the healer's needs. He briskly turned back toward his desk, seeing other students begin to trickle in, and closed his face and aura off even more, but not before catching the look that young Valnerius flashed to Makay, and her answering nose-rub and eye avoidance, nor missing the blush. He still was not so sure it was wise to have her taking dueling, no matter what her aunt said, in vouching for her emotional control. Castle Carrick, December 1. Snow fell outside the window, each flake fully as large as Kirsty's hand, as they danced around and down in lazy spirals. She still could not fathom how most of the students did not feel the presence of the lady that brought the snows, nor how so few could see her when she stood before them in her veiled cloak. If David saw her, he never said so, and she had hesitated to mention having glimpsed her the night before, on their way back to the castle from his monthly sanctuary. What if he didn't believe her? Her aunt sat across the table from her, cutting a precise bite from her steak, the baked potato dripping with butter and country gravy. Kirsty fell back to cutting her own steak at the soft clearing of her throat. The high collar and ornate house brooch did nothing to slow the consumption.
"Kirsten, I am more than a little concerned about that book you found, and how what you're deciphering in it is forming you."
The clipped tones were warm after the terseness of Kirsty's report. Kirsty relaxed a little. It was good to hear her given name instead of her surname from her aunt, and to be able to call her auntie instead of professor.
"It's only a book. I've not found any mind-control spells or anything else in it. But it bears a still living for her."
Professor McLoman paused to take a bite and chew, then swallow, before continuing.
"The headmaster and I are both convinced that it is an actual selkie skin, but we have not found the other 2 copies that are mentioned."
Kirsty ate a few bites of her salad, then a bite of her own steak, before replying.
"Auntie, maybe the other books have been destroyed already, like this Father Rowan thought they might be. If I were a Cowan, and especially if I were a member of the church, I would." "It is a distinct possibility."
The assistant head acceded, before taking a sip of her wine.
"If that is the case, then, it was very wise of this father to disperse the knowledge in this way. So, auntie, I've been curious. Does the headmaster have any idea where the Abbey is, or was?"
"We have a record of the donation, but no record of the location. There is evidence to say that whoever this Father Rowan was, that he had very friendly and close ties to someone at the school. We have both spoken to several of the most likely ghosts and paintings, as to if they remembered anything that might link the book with a former student, but no one remembers anything. The nun is included among those, since she likes to travel and visit the various religious institutions. She knows of none that match the name." They focused on their meal, each lost in their thoughts as they pondered the mystery of the book, taking solace and refuge in each other's company, and trading the occasional glance. The fire crackled softly in the hearth to the soft whump-whump of especially large and sticky flakes perching on the ledge outside the glass. All too soon the meal was done, and it was back to the usual dynamic.
"Before you go, I would like you to leave the book with me for a little while, so that the headmaster and I can look over it again."
Kirsty looked up at her aunt, a slightly feral gleam in her eye at the idea.
"It will not be long, dear. Only a week or so."
Kirsty sighed, pulling it slowly from her bag, much slower than she needed to. It felt like she was pulling off her skin to lay it on the table. Withdrawing her fingers brought moisture to her brow.
"It's not even your own skin. That shouldn't be happening."
Her aunt had gotten up while she'd been trying to relinquish the book, and leaned over Kirsty. Kirsty looked up into her aunt's eyes.
"I know, but it still feels like part of me."
Professor McLoman pulled Kirsty into a hug, and rested her nose lightly on top of the child's head.
"You'll feel better once you have your own skin. Maybe the lack of one makes you particularly vulnerable. I'm sorry that I've not experienced this myself to be a better guide for you."
"It's okay." Kirsty tried to fight the trembling.
"It's only a few more months till I go out, right? Then I can be a real person." "You're already a real person to me, selkie or not. I know you've already got a soul." McLoman stroked her niece's back softly, while holding her tight. "Thank you, Aunt Balara."
Kirsty squeezed tightly, before tearing herself away and squaring her shoulders, being careful not to look at the table or heed the soft chanting from the book in its deep voice. The professor watched her niece go through the door, then sat back down as the table cleared itself, putting her head in her hands and collecting herself. It would not do to drip tears on a 3rd century manuscript.
of small details in my writing have actual real-life inspiration behind them. For example, the Quiche family, who are lightkeepers for Seal Point, are actually inspired partly from the lighthouses around Crescent City in Trinidad area of California, especially the Battery Point Lighthouse. What you're seeing right now is the inspiration behind Kirsty's bracelet. This bracelet is made out of silver, and it was given to me while I was at a sun dance when my daughter was small. It was her very first sun dance, and I met a person named Star. Now, this person was one of those people that balance masculine and feminine, and that is the nature of their medicine. This person gifted me this bracelet as a reminder to keep my own masculine and feminine aspects in balance. From this point on, I was extremely interested in balancing two different types of the feminine. They are part of the inspiration behind Mara and the lady of the fresh waters and the mistress of the sea.